what's the status of the implementation of the consent decree that you've seen in Florida to date?
Again, you can look at things, you look at any situation as a glass half full or a glass half empty. And I think that you have to look at Florida very much that way. First of all, it is crucially important, and I've found, Florida isn't unique in this, but I certainly find it in talking to people, that to know some history, to know what wasn't here before court orders or legislation, in this case court orders. Essentially, as I said, nobody was trained working with these kids. Very few kids were being identified. The numbers have increased dramatically, far surpassing the rise in immigration. We went, I think, the first couple of years, we doubled almost every year the number of kids who were being identified, and identity generally means being serviced in some way. On the other hand, you obviously shouldn't be so Pollyannish and thinking that just because kids are identified that they're getting what they ought to be getting. But expectations also increase incrementally. In fact, I was on a phone call this morning to somebody in Orange County who was concerned that they are cutting back on their bilingual education program. Not cutting back on their ESOL program necessarily, but converting a bilingual program that they developed. Now, with my biases, I think that that's a bad thing to be happening there. But it's not a debate between ESOL and nothing. It is a question of bilingual and ESOL. So that's a very different debate. But if in fact you've come new to this thing, it seems like this is a terrible disaster, and it's not a good thing, but it is a different level of debate than occurred 10 years ago. Implementation. I have no doubt that we've got very serious problems. We knew all along we would have serious problems. There's a lot of districts who didn't even acknowledge that they had these kids in their districts beforehand, and certainly had the attitudes that I described were common before Lau versus Nichols. Those are common attitudes here that the kids had to change, not the schools. I couldn't tell you what districts or how many schools fully live up to the decree. I couldn't do that. But I get, and I'm some distance away, 3,000 miles away, but I get calls probably at least once a week from somebody who's got something that reflects a violation of the decree. A problem we've had, we also build in an obligation of the state to monitor this, which is something they were not doing before. And they've been reasonably okay on that. There also is a complaint procedure that if a parent has a complaint, they can file it with the state, and they don't have to do any sort of language. They don't have to use any particular format. They can use it. They can write it in their own language. And the state has an obligation with fairly stringent timelines to come in and investigate, and that's worked. They've been or more or less worked. They've been at least to date fairly responsive to those complaints, and have been maybe not as vigorous as we would have liked all the time, but have found districts out of compliance with in the monitoring process, and put some heat on them. The problem, of course, is, and Florida is not alone in this, but it suggests things that have to be done, is that no matter how many people you have in Tallahassee, it's inadequate for 69 school districts, or how many school districts we have, big county school districts, how many schools, probably thousands of schools. a good number of them have some limited English proficient kids. There just isn't the resources, even though the decree does require that they maintain a reasonable sized staff to monitor a state this large, as diverse as this large, is a very hard thing to do. Our notion on addressing that is that what you've got to do is to do a good job of training parents and community advocates about their rights and get them active in terms of monitoring when things don't work, to file complaints with the state, when things don't work there, to contact the Meta attorneys to do something. And you've got to educate teachers. Teachers have to be advocates. They have to work with the parents and with the kids. And teachers have got to be politically sensitive to these sorts of things and be helpful. If you don't have that sort of grassroots effort, you're going to have pretty substantial problems. Early in the decree, we in fact, out of the decree, created a multicultural coalition that was, quite frankly, very unique to Florida, which people of different races, and Florida is a state that has a long history of animosity between African Americans and Latinos. This coalition was, frankly, people really worked a lot together, did a lot of things together, did training programs in different areas on behalf of these kids, on behalf of course, other kids of color. Unfortunately, some of the funding for coordinators disappeared. Some people left the state that were instrumental in it, and it no longer exists. But there clearly needs to be an effort to build upon those sorts of coalitions, or create those sorts of coalitions. And there's a need to reach out, I think, a tremendous need to reach out to different groups. One thing that is often forgotten by bilingual or advocates for limited English proficient kids is you can solve all the language problems in the world, and you still have problems that bedevil kids of color and impoverished kids throughout the country. And I'm referring to such things as underfunding. I'm referring to such things as general problems of having trained teachers in inner city schools, trying to beat up overcrowded facilities. There's a whole range of problems, and these are often things that bridge over between groups, and I think that groups can work very well, can accomplish a lot more by working together, and there are a lot more commonalities than there are differences in the problems that hold these kids back.